Hi everyone, it's Ren here. I hope you're doing well. And in this video, I'm going to try to express how I perceive Fi, and more specifically, the functions of the INFP in all their beauty, in all their genius, through a work of literature. And hopefully, in the same way that, to me, this provides a very clear illustration which leaves no doubt about what Fi consists in, and specifically the combination between Fi, Si, and Ne consists in the INFP, just will remain forever marked in your memory, or like it was in my memory when I read this particular passage. It's the passage from a work called In Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, a French writer, but obviously I'll be reading the passage. It's a bit of a long passage, but bear with me, and I think that you will experience a beautiful, like what the way in which Fi and the Si can really attain to beauty and masterpiece level. Just to give you a little bit of context before I read it, in this passage, the character of this chapter is called Swann. Swann is a man who is not an aristocrat. The setting is early 20th century France or late 19th century Paris, and it's a society in which the aristocracy is declining, but is still holding quite a bit of prestige. Now Swann, he's not an aristocrat. He's from like the high bourgeoisie, but he has many connections among the aristocrats. He's a very rich man, a very refined art critic. And he's approached by this woman called Odette at some point earlier in the chapter. And this Odette admires him, and they go on a kind of date. And at this time, Swann is a little bit dejected. He doesn't really believe, he's probably like in his mid-30s to late 30s, maybe mid-30s. And he doesn't really believe in love anymore. It's not quite clear, whether he ever really believed in it, but he accumulates conquests here and there. He's a sensitive man, bit jaded romantically, and initially he's not particularly attracted to this Odette. He sees that she is beautiful, but he's not particularly attracted to her, and yet he's kind of touched by the fact that Odette puts a lot of effort and puts her heart out, makes him feel like she really, really wants his love. And eventually he falls in love with her, despite the fact that they don't have a lot in common, that he's intellectually more advanced than she is, and that in the first place he wasn't particularly attracted to her. And from the moments that he becomes more attracted to her, more in love with her, slowly little by little, Proust describes with a level of detail that is unparalleled how she progressively becomes more distant, and she starts to realize she has him, and he's willing to do anything for her, and she progressively becomes more distant, and their relationship starts to disintegrate. Okay, so in the initial stages, she's the one who is making more efforts, but he's touched by her interest and eventually falls in love with her. But progressively, this person whom initially he wasn't attracted to is the one that stops loving him. And the more he starts to notice that she doesn't really love him anymore, the more obsessed with her he becomes, the more he needs to see her to get this sense of confirmation, even though there is at the back of his mind this realization that she has, in all of her everyday behaviors, she's less available, she's seeing other people, but he's trying to suppress it. He's trying to remain focused on what's good about their relationship. But what is the reality in this? And just importantly for this particular passage, he is invited to one of his old friends, aristocratic friends' parties that he had ended up stopping to go to, because he just started to arrange all his time so that he could see Odette, who herself is becoming less available, and so he's kind of like segregating himself from his old friends as well. But he's going to this party because that time Odette, as often is the case these days, she's not available. But he's going there because he wants to just, not think about her too much. He's trying to enjoy himself, right? What's important to know for this particular moment, he's already there and he's comfortable, people are happy to see him, he's more or less capable of enjoying himself. What's important to know for this particular passage is that at a much earlier point in his relationship with Odette, if you like, they're invited to a particular place where there is a pianist who plays a song, right, by this composer called Vinteuil. And when Swann listens to it, and he's a very sensitive, very, very refined man, he's absolutely blown away by this little phrase, as he calls it. It's a little phrase that he falls instantly in love with, and then forgets about it, or he just, well, I mean, he researches it a little bit, but we don't hear about that phrase for a long time. But it's a phrase that really struck him and made him very emotional the first time he heard it. Okay, and then the whole story with Odette takes place, and this is what I'm going to read. It's 2 pages, and bear with me. It's beautiful. It's very emotional. Meanwhile, the concert's begun again. There's a concert at the party, and Swann saw that he could not now go before the end of the new number. He suffered greatly from being shut up among all these people whose stupidity and absurdities struck him all the more painfully since, being ignorant of his love and incapable, had they known of it, of taking any interest or of doing more than smile at it, as at some childish nonsense, or deplore it as an act of folly, they made it appear to him in the aspect of a subjective state which existed for himself alone, whose reality there was nothing external to confirm. He suffered, above all, to the point where even the sound of the instruments made him to cry out, from having to prolong his exile in this place to which Odette would never come, in which nothing was aware of her existence, from which she was entirely absent. But suddenly, it was as though she had entered, and this apparition was so agonizingly painful that his hand clutched at his heart. The violin had risen to a series of high notes, on which it rested as though awaiting something, holding on to them in a prolonged expectancy, in the exaltation of already seeing the object of its expectation approaching, and with a desperate effort to last out until its arrival, to welcome it before itself is expiring, to keep the way open for a moment longer, with all its remaining strengths, so that the stranger might pass, as one holds a door open that would otherwise automatically close. And before Swann had had time to understand what was happening and say to himself, "It's the little phrase from the Vinteuil sonata. I mustn't listen." All his memories of the day when Odette had been in love with him, which he had succeeded until that moment in keeping invisible in the depths of his being, deceived by this sudden reflection of a season of love whose sun, they supposed, had dawned again, had awakened from their slumber, had taken wing and risen to sing maddeningly in his ears, without pity for his present desolation, the forgotten strains of happiness. In the place of the abstract expressions, the time when I was happy, the time when I was loved, which he had often used before then without suffering too much, since his intelligence had not embodied in them anything of the past, save fictitious extracts which preserved none of the reality. He now recovered everything that had fixed unalterably the specific volatile essence of that lost happiness. He could see it all, the snowy curled petals of the chrysanthemum, which she had tossed after him into his carriage, which he had kept pressed to his lips, the address Maison Dorée, embossed on the note paper on which he had read, "My hand trembles so as I write to you." The contraction of her eyebrows when she said, pleadingly, "You won't leave it too long before getting in touch with me." He could smell the heated iron of the barber, whom he used to have singe his hair while Loredan went to fetch the little seamstress, could feel the showers which fell so often that spring, the ice-cold homeward drive in his Victoria, by moonlight, all the network of mental habits, of seasonal impressions, of sensory reactions, which had extended over a series of weeks, its uniform meshes in which his body found itself inextricably caught. At that time he had been satisfying a sensual curiosity in discovering the pleasures of those who live for love alone. He had supposed that he could stop there, that he would not be obliged to learn their sorrows also. Yet how small a thing the actual charm of Odette was now, in comparison with the fearsome terror which extended it like a cloudy halo all around her, the immense anguish of not knowing at every hour, the day and night, what she had been doing, of not possessing her wholly, always and everywhere. Alas, he recalled the accents in which she had exclaimed, "But I can see you at any time, I'm always free." She who was never free now. He remembered the interest, the curiosity she had shown in his life, her passionate desire that he should do her the favor, which it was he who had dreaded at that time as a possibly tedious waste of his time and disturbance of his arrangements, of granting her access to his study. How she had been obliged to beg him to let him take him to the Virgins, and when he allowed her to come to him once a month, how she had had to repeat to him time and time again, before he let himself be swayed, what a joy it would be to see each other daily, a custom for which he longed, when to him it seemed only a tiresome distraction, which she had then grown tired of, and finally broken, while for him it had become so irresistible and painful a need. Little had he suspected how truly he spoke when at their third meeting, as she repeated, "But why don't you let me come to you oftener?" He had told her, laughing, and in a vein of gallantry, that it was for fear of forming a hopeless passion. Now, alas, it still happened at times that she wrote to him from a restaurant or a hotel on paper which bore a printed address, but printed in letters of fire that seared his heart. "It's written from the Hôtel Vouillemont. What on earth can she have gone there for? With whom? What happened there?" He remembered the gas jets being extinguished along the Boulevard des Italiens when he had met her against all expectations among the errant shades on that night, which had seemed to him almost supernatural, and which indeed, a night from a period when he had not even to ask himself whether he would be annoying her by looking for her and finding her, so certain was he that she knew no greater happiness than to see him and to let him take her home, belonged to a mysterious world to which one may never return once its doors are closed. And Swann could distinguish, standing motionless before that scene of remembered happiness, a wretched figure who failed him with such pity, before he did not at first recognize who it was, that he had to lower his eyes lest anyone should observe that they were filled with tears. It was himself. And so that is my experience of what's Fi, the exploration of emotion. Si, the exploration of memory. And Annie, which recalls all these different instances, just coalesce in something that is really incredibly moving and touching and so relatable. I think that a lot of us have been in these situations where we have been attached to someone, or to whom we're trying to hold on to the memory of, and creating little stories in our minds that we cope with thanks to them, because even though they're not really real, their time has passed. And to have this sensory impression from this little phrase from the piano, and to be reminded all in his face of the contrast between what was really the case back then and what is now the case, is something that is to me quite unforgettable. So anyway, I'm not going to explain it. I'm going to let the extract stand by itself, and let me know if you agree that this is INFP genius. See you guys.